I mean, the on the big picture here, this guy's right.
Well,
and
I think
just say
two things about that. Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, June 10th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP co-founder and president Tom Bevan and Washington bureau chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, the drama in Los Angeles continues. Donald Trump has deployed about 700 Marines to protect federal buildings and law enforcement, adding to the thousands of National Guard members he's already sent. Democrats say he's overstepped his constitutional authority and he's making things worse. And our own Phil Wegman was in the White House today. And guys, here's Phil asking the president about whether this edition of the LA riots should be considered an insurrection.
Mr. President, will you invoke the Insurrection Act to deal with the situation in California?
If there's an insurrection, I would certainly invoke it. We'll see. But I can tell you last night was terrible. The night before that was terrible. We have, as you've seen, it was on most of your networks, people with big, heavy hammers pounding the concrete and pounding curbs, pounding it, breaking up all, and handing these big chunks of concrete to people. And they were taking that concrete, going up on bridges and dropping it into the roof of a car. They were throwing it at our police. They were throwing it at our soldiers that are there. And we got it stopped, and we have them in custody right now. Look, if we didn't get involved, right now, Los Angeles would be burning, just like it was burning a number of months ago with all the houses that were lost. Los Angeles right now would be on fire.
So, Tom, there was looting overnight, but the Democrats and a lot of the media keep insisting that this is mostly peaceful. What do you make of it, and what do you make of the reporting?
Yeah, well, so I'm going to talk to Phil Wegman a little bit later in the show. When we recorded our segment, he's on pool duty at the White House, and we're in the middle of the interview, and he's like, "I got to go," and he got up and he left, and so he went to the Oval Office, and then he managed to ask that question, which is a great question, by the way, because it is one of those things that people have been talking about, and the president obviously said he wouldn't hesitate to invoke the Insurrection Act if he felt that it was necessary. You know, Karen Bass had a press avail earlier today where she kind of doubled down on, I mean, she said, look, you know, she did say that any violence wasn't going to be tolerated, any vandalism. She mentioned the graffiti in particular, and said that just because you maybe went home last night, don't assume that you're going to get off scot-free. We will prosecute you and if you were involved in that. So that was striking, I thought, a better tone for her and for Democrats in general. But she still insisted that everything was fine on Thursday and it was very peaceful and everything would have been fine but for Donald Trump stepping in. And that's what really caused the whole situation. I don't think people are buying that. I don't think that passes the smell test for most people. I think probably Democrats probably think that, but I'm not sure about everybody else. And certainly there's video of things that were happening before Trump got involved, where cars were being burned and you know, rocks were being thrown and those sorts of things. So it's not over yet. Hopefully things calm down a little bit so this doesn't escalate any further. But I just don't know that this episode, when you step back and look at it, the Democrats have done themselves any favors by the way that they've handled it and the way that they've kind of gone out of their way to excuse some of the violence that's happened and then, you know, tried to deflect the blame onto Trump.
Yeah. You know, Carl, one of the things that I think people are interested in is what is the actual role being played by the National Guard and now these troops on the scene? Because my understanding is that they really aren't involved in a way that would sort of give credence to this idea that somehow that's what's driving the protesters to violence.
Well, yeah, the National Guard was originally sent there, and I think the president's idea is to protect the federal building there, the ICE building, the headquarters, to make sure that federal employees aren't attacked by ICE people. You know, in this world that we live in, where we have sort of two Americas, and I don't mean based on class or race but where you get your news from, where the Democratic side or the Republican side. There's once Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass said, well, this Trump did this to escalate. That's why he did this, to escalate the situation. First of all, that sends a signal to demonstrators to escalate the situation, which is not a position the governor or the mayor wanted to be in, but that's sort of one easy interpretation of it. Secondly, then they can never be disproven. They say, well, but like I said, if we had things under control until they set these people. On the other side, people say, well, obviously they can control it. They're not able to control it even with the federal presence there. These people were going to burn down the city. And that's what Trump is saying now. Now, I guess the president could call their bluff and pull the troops out. Does anybody think that this would calm down? Maybe. That'd be a pretty high stakes. You're playing a high stakes poker there. But, the Democrats want to win the argument as well as control the streets. And I think it's hard to do both.
Yeah, it does seem to me, Tom, that the problem, the Democrats in this, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, is that if it gets worse, Trump can say, that's why I sent these extra resources in, and it makes the Democrats look like they can't control the situation. If it gets better, Trump can say, well, see, it was because I sent these guys in, and that turned the protesters off. It seems like it's a lose-lose situation for the Democrats. I don't know what else they can do other than maybe the only thing I thought is could they turn around and say, well, we wanted the National Guard ourselves and.
No, they can't. They've gone to court.
Can't do that.
Yeah, so
now
they're kind of stuck, aren't they?
A little bit. And look, Trump's also, Carl mentioned the sort of proving the negative, and Trump's negative is, well, had we not done this, LA would have been burning like it was a couple of months ago, right? And maybe it would have, maybe it wouldn't have. We don't know. But I think there are plenty of folks who believe that it's better to be ahead of this stuff and nip it in the bud as opposed to letting it, sort of blossom and potentially get out of control. So people probably, well, I assume Republicans probably believe that. But yeah, Democrats they're in a kind of a tough spot. And they, as I said, they haven't really done themselves any favor, particularly as, this is an issue that they paid for at the polls in 2024. I mean, immigration is an issue. They're on the wrong side of this issue with the public. And they can't seem to figure out a way to get on the right side of it.
Are they on the wrong side of the issue in California? I mean, the politics of that state are much different than the nation as a whole, and particularly these 7 swing states we worked so hard to cover last year. If you read the Washington Post or the LA Times today, you'd think that everybody in Los Angeles is outraged at Trump, not at the illegals, not at the governor, not at the mayor, at ICE, at Trump, trying to enforce federal law.
Okay, but I mean, again, that's you may be right. California is different, but nationally, the Democratic Party in general, with their approval ratings, are already in the toilet. Gavin Newsom wants to run for president. Clearly, he's not doing himself any favors necessarily.
Neither are these rioters. They're not doing Gavin.
Well, and let's also, Trump mentioned this too. Let's also point out, that a lot of these folks too are these paid agitators. I mean, we had reports of these, truckloads of these masks getting delivered last night, in boxes, basically, like right off the shelves. And it's like, where is this coming from? Who's supplying these folks with this equipment? There's an organization to this, an element of and we see these sort of paid agitators. They show up all over the place. They show up they showed up in 2020 and some of those protests that turned violent.
Tom, I don't think you need to import people to Los Angeles. There's 10 million people live in Los Angeles County, or 12 million. There's plenty of progressives right there. My guess is this is homegrown resistance.
I don't know about that because, and the
partially
media reports try to draw this distinction between the peaceful protesters who are out during the day and then these hooligans who come out at night. And, I've heard reports say, there's a couple hundred of them. I'm not sure you're right, Carl. I think that maybe some of these people are coming in from other places, Portland or wherever. And they're sort of, because when we had those protests in DC, you sort of got that feeling. There were people coming in from out of town They're busting in trouble from outer state, as the boss once said, right?
In Atlantic City.
But, Tom, another way this thing could have spread, I guess, is not just in Los Angeles, but from city to city. And there have been protests in San Francisco and Dallas. But at least, I guess, so far, we haven't seen the kind of city by city growth that we've seen sometimes in the past when these kinds of protests get started.
No, but you can see the potential, and certainly as as ICE continues its operations around the country, I mean, you could see something like this very quickly and easily happening in a place like Chicago, for example, where I am, where you've got, one of the most progressive mayors in the United States.
You think also Brandon Johnson would march would march?
Absolutely, would be out there throwing rocks, spray painting stuff. No, I mean, he is an activist for sure. But yeah, you can see how this could happen in other cities, maybe not as part of this, but as ICE continues its operations around the country, to the extent they do some of these raids in other cities. And there have already been raids in Chicago that have been covered. They haven't resulted in these kinds of protests, but maybe after LA, they will in the future.
Yeah. Carl, there's one other aspect of this. We just got a couple of minutes left, but that I find fascinating, and that's the use of driverless cars as sort of protest vehicles. These protesters get these driverless taxis to come to wherever the protest is. I guess they call them, and then they light them on fire. And because they're battery operated, they burn much better than a regular gas fired car. And I just find that sort of like this, just makes it all the more sort of like some science fiction film. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's like a dystopian, futuristic thing. Elon Musk has already announced plans to expand the driverless car fleet. That's that piece we had by Greg Orman, who I'll be talking to later in another segment. He talks about Elon Musk, Tesla's company, why it's valued so highly. One reason is he's already announced he's going to build, a billion robots, but also driverless cars. And so I wonder if some of that is aimed at Elon. There are secondary boycotts, and I guess there's secondary riot, violence, arson too. But the other part is, then they don't have to worry about burning, some immigrant cab driver alive. They just burn the car. Yeah. but the burning police cars. I mean, the president of Mexico, she's a socialist. She's no friend of Trump. She called out these demonstrators for that. Burning police cars, burning taxi cabs, arson, throwing chunks of concrete at police officers. Those are crimes. Those are felonies. That's rioting. It's not protesting a policy. That's not redressing the government, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. And one thing I don't understand is why these people haven't just systematically been arrested. You get LAPD has, 3,700 officers. Just arrest these people one by one, take them to jail until this thing's quelled. My guess is that it's a few people causing most of the mayhem, a small percentage of the rioters. But I'm not out there covering it, so I don't quite know what law enforcement is doing. But this thing, it's entering its sixth day today. They better get a handle on it.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. Don't go away. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Carl. And gentleman Pete Hegseth testified before the House today about the Pentagon budget. But he was pressed by Democrats about the deployment of the National Guard to Los Angeles. Here's a little bit of what he said about the National Guard.
The National Guard and Reserves bring great value, not to mention the civilian skills, the additive civilian skills that they bring. Completely recognize the shift that happened after 9/11. I was a part of that, as were many people in the Guard of our generation. I think we're entering an even another phase, especially under President Trump, with his focus on the homeland, where the National Guard and Reserves become a critical component of how we secure that homeland and apply those civilian sets across the spectrum.
So, Carl, that raised some eyebrows on Capitol Hill.
It's an authoritarian dog whistle.
Yeah, what do you make of it?
If you're watching on YouTube and you're not listening on Sirius XM, it raised my eyebrows too. Listen, it was the counterpoint to what Rob Bonta, the Attorney General of California, said when he filed suit against the Trump administration for sending this was before the Marines were even tasked with this, but just the National Guard. Gavin Newsom said it was un-American to use troops against Americans, leaving aside the fact that a lot of these demonstrators are foreigners, but and in the lawsuit Rob Bonta filed, he went on and said, this is our country. This is a bedrock principle of America, and that we don't call it the military. We don't live in a military under military rule. We live under civilian rule, and it's a pretty basic American civics. And Hegseth uses this. He's only been there 6 months or less. He uses this DoD jargon. Civilian. What was that phrase used? But what does that even mean? These are federal troops. They're soldiers. And I think he's going to have a better answer than that for why he thinks it's a good use of the Pentagon to use these people to keep social order. He didn't mention this, but the other point is that when Rob Bonta and Gavin Newsom, act shocked that the National Guard would ever be deployed, Rob Bonta said in his lawsuit, they're only there, in foreign invasion. Well, they were in that same city for months following the fires. National Guard only left last week of May. They were there to prevent looting. So I think Pete Hegseth I think he's going to have to do better than that in explaining why this is not a constitutional problem. But the Democrats also have to quit pretending that this is the first time, this is some first thing that's ever happened in American history to have National Guard, used in California.
Well, it's not. I think it's not that it's the first or last time that they'll use the National Guard. It's the first time since 1965 that a president has called out the National Guard without consulting or being asked by the governor. Correct?
That's right. And the Democrats have used that argument, but they haven't used it quite as much as they want to, because Gavin Newsom doesn't want to be compared to George Wallace. He doesn't like that comparison. That's the last time the federal government ignored a governor.
Right. This is 1965. It was George Wallace was the governor of Alabama, but yeah, right. But Tom, did conservative dog whistle, or not conservative, but a sort of authoritarian dog whistle? Do you think that's
I'm sure that's how the folks in the media and Democrats heard that, and Democrat members of the committee heard that, right? Which was, now Pete Hegseth could be talking about, when he talks about securing the homeland, the first thing that comes to mind for me would be putting those kinds of troops at the border. But certainly, if as we just talked about, I mean, if ICE continues to do its business and we continue to see protests like this happen, it may be that the National Guard gets used more to help quell these protests around the country, and we'll have to see. I don't want to speculate on that, and that may happen and may not happen. Remember, in Trump's first term, he threatened to call out the National Guard in Chicago. You guys remember that? Because the murder rate here was out of control.
That's right.
And it was, Barack Obama's hometown, I think, was one of the other reasons he did it. But, and actually, we had talked about, I think I had even recommended it because the authorities here were not doing anything to protect the citizens of Chicago, particularly on the south side and the west side, where a lot of the murders are concentrated in those areas, and people couldn't even go outside of their homes. And Democrats have run the city of Chicago for 100 years, 90 years, something like that. They control every single elected office statewide. And they weren't responding to this. So, that's another situation where it might actually be appropriate to use the National Guard to help protect the citizenry from crime. So, we'll see.
Well, and Tom, to add to that, when Trump was president the first time, and then he left, and Joe Biden was president, you had these attacks on federal buildings, on ICE buildings in Portland, in Seattle. There was an attempted firebomb of federal officers there and of police stations. And what Trump, who was in exile for that 4 years, he thought that the local officials in these cities wouldn't protect federal agents. And so that also informs his judgment here. The Los Angeles and California officials saying that's not the case, but that's also part of the context.
Yeah.
Here.
My impression was, and I sort of dipped in and out of the hearings today, but it seemed like a pretty good hearing for Hegseth. I didn't feel like they really laid a glove on him. I felt like he handled himself pretty well. And it reminded me, Carl, of why one of the reasons why he got the job was because he looks the part and he is a smooth talker on television. I don't know. That was my impression, at least. I thought that, and I'm not carrying any water for him. I'm just looking at it as a piece of television.
Yeah, but Andy, you may have such a low bar there because you remember his confirmation hearings in which they just threw haymaker after haymaker at the guy. And for the most part, they tended to, the Democrats, when he was up for confirmation, acted like this was like Trump was trolling them, that he wasn't even serious in naming Hegseth. They just were besides themselves. Now they realize he has the job. He committed some glaring faux pas early on, including, this thing with Jeffrey Goldberg, and Trump didn't fire him. And what I saw, I didn't watch as much of the hearing as you did, but what I saw was that the Democrats sort of accepting his legitimacy. He's there. And you know what? That's a step. That's a positive step.
Yeah. Interesting. Hey, Tom, we got to talk about the Democratic National Committee for a minute here. They're in the middle of this vote about David Hogg.
David Hogg.
Right. And there was this phone call that was leaked. We didn't get a chance to talk about it yesterday, but I think it came out over the weekend, where DNC Chair Ken Martin, he's angry at David Hogg. And he said this in part on a phone call. He said, we are relying on the he said the quote is for him was that he's essentially destroyed any chance I have to show the leadership that I need to show. What's going on at the DNC? And, what are these guys up to?
It struck me as sort of a pity party on Ken Martin's part, not necessarily a profile and courage. This I don't know, how old is David Hogg? 27 or 25? Yeah, this 25-year-old's like wreaking havoc on you. Can't control him. Is like, he's old enough to be David Hogg's father. So it just seemed, look, obviously David Hogg has created a problem for Democrats, one that they're trying to rectify by basically kicking him out, re-voting, holding a vote, invoking this clause in the bylaws or something about gender equity. And so, but he has been a real problem, and he's been going around because he's been getting a lot of media attention and going on MSNBC and a bunch of other platforms and basically, throwing bombs at the DNC. And so I get what the chairman is saying there, and again, it was a private call. It was leaked. So whatever, he was being frank, but it came off as a little bit whiny to me. That doesn't strike me as how a strong leader would react. Now, if the call had leaked and he'd said something like, I'm going to take this guy out to the woodshed and, and show him what's what, that would have been a different response. But instead it was kind of like, oh, I can't do my job. I don't have, he's making it really hard on me.
Yeah, he just said nobody knows who I am, Carl. Which,
nobody knows who I am.
Yeah,
it's terrible.
It was not a good look. It was whiny, as Tom said, and it was I felt bad for him, but it was like the call would have been appropriate if you were talking to your grad student son about how he's making you look bad. I'm trying to help you with the dean's son, but and you every time I do something, you escalate it. Come on,
look bad.
Yeah, you make me look bad. It wasn't what you expect from a party leader, but this idea where the Democrats said we're just gonna have a do-over, that kind of appeals to me. I mean, that would be a nice thing to do for elections too. Wait a minute,
you gotta change the whole.
But
we have a parliamentary system. We could do.
I think one of us, I guess it's me, should take David Hogg's complaint at face value for a minute and take it seriously, because it's a point we've made. The Democratic Party, when David Hogg comes into the DNC, the leaders are octogenarians, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer in the House, Jim Clyburn. That's the leadership of the House, before Hakeem Jeffries takes over. Chuck Schumer is, in his 70s, and he's been in politics literally since he was in college. He's never held a job. Joe Biden was in his 80s and was shoved aside. So for Hogg to say, for this young guy to say, we need new blood. We need younger people. I think we've made the same point on this podcast. I mean, the on the big picture here, this guy's right.
Well,
and
I think there's two things about that, Carl. One, what he said is that he's going to raise $20 million to knock off Democrats in primaries in safe blue districts. So
not the greatest tactic.
Secondly, he's a vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee. I mean, if you want to do that, and I think there's I think you could make a reasonable argument that, and I think you're right about that. But I'm not sure you can do that if that's your position. You're supposed to be getting Democrats reelected, and you're supposed to get the guys who are there to keep their seats. Tom, you see it that way?
Point taken.
Yeah, I agree. And look, it's not like the Democrats don't have any young people. It's not a matter of going out and you've got AOC, you've got, David Hogg's a big fan of Jasmine Crockett, right? I mean, I think everybody agrees that the Democratic Party has been run by people who are sort of past their prime. They're too old. They do need young blood, but they have it in the party. So just promote those people, right? You don't have to be going and targeting Democrats and safe blue districts. That seems counterproductive, as James Carville once said, and then apparently recanted. You know what, you say that, but it's the easiest way to get elected in safe blue districts. That's how AOC got to be AOC. She took on a Democrat who was in the leadership, an older white man, and beat him in a primary at a very low turnout primary, won by 3,000 votes in a district with 700,000 people. I think fewer than 40,000 voted, but that's how you get those seats. If you run people like that, if you run these flame-throwing progressives in their 20s in swing districts, you're going to lose to the Republicans. There's a difference between someone doing that on their own and someone within the party spending $20 million to try and effectuate that kind of stuff, Carl. That's the difference, right?
I just thought we'd give his idea, give it a little serious consideration. That's all.
I would just also point out that the $20 million is a notional figure. He does not have $20 million. He's never raised $20 million. I give him a lot of credit. He's done a lot in his life, but he's 25 years old and he has not, he's not done something.
Didn't he start a pillow company? Wasn't that one of his things to compete with the My Pillow guy?
I think you may be right. We should fact check that.
Let's find out what happened to that company.
Let's get him on the show. Let's get David Hogg on our show.
Carl, I got about a minute here, and I'm just wondering about the vote itself. This is kind of interesting to me that this vote that the committee members are having about this redo is taking 48 hours or Monday through Wednesday, I guess, for them to do it. It just, again, doesn't send the signal that this is a crisp, organization that
you would think they'd want to rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna maybe this won't surprise you guys, but I'm gonna defend that process too.
Okay.
And not be look, I mean, neither the Democrats or Republicans can count votes in Iowa, even in a presidential caucus. So, there's some reason to think we ought to be able to do better than that. But the White House Correspondents Association, I was president of that. I won election. The voting process is open for like 3 weeks. And with like 2 days left I realized I hadn't done any campaigning. So I called a bunch of my friends and got them to go vote. So there's a glass house issue for me criticizing.
And you won by how many votes, Carl?
Like 4 votes. So I think the DNC process is eminently fair and very sensible.
Right. Okay, well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and the elections expert himself, Carl Cannon. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder, president of RCP, joined now by Phil Wegman. He's our White House correspondent. Coming to us from the White House. He's on pool duty today. How you doing, Phil?
Doing well. Thanks.
Any excitement over there at the White House?
Not yet. The president is expected to travel to Fort Bragg. He's going to be departing here. So not a lot of news-making opportunities for us in the press pool right now, but we'll see what happens on that trip.
All right. Well, we're not here to have you talk about that anyway. We're here to talk about your piece, which is on the site this morning. Go to RealClearPolitics.com. You can find it. Titled, What Senator Josh Hawley Wants from the One Big Beautiful Bill, in parentheses, for Medicaid. So you interviewed Senator Hawley. He is a sort of fierce defender of Medicaid in the Senate. tell us a little bit about the interview and what exactly he's arguing for.
Yeah, Senator Josh Hawley right now is the fiercest defender of Medicaid from the right currently. He's been banging this drum all spring into the summer, warning the White House and his colleagues over in the House that cuts to Medicaid benefits aren't going to fly. Now, I wanted to know exactly what that meant because last week he had this conversation with President Trump and then immediately tweeted that there would be no Medicaid benefit cuts. But does that mean that he opposes work requirements for able-bodied adults? Does that mean that he opposes some of these eligibility requirements to keep undocumented immigrants off of the benefit rolls? Hawley said no, he supports both of those things, but he is skeptical of some of these other provisions in the House bill, like the provider tax. And basically, what this all boiled down to is that Hawley said that the message he received from Donald Trump was that people who cut Medicaid lose elections. And his argument is that if the GOP is going to be a working class coalition, they're going to be a majority party moving forward, they need to avoid cutting the benefits for their base. So that was the 30,000 foot view from the senior senator from Missouri.
But I mean, I have to say, because as I was reading it, I'm like, okay, well, what cuts exactly? Because he says, I'm 100% for, getting for the work requirements that came out of the House. And I'm 100% for wholeheartedly in favor of, kicking illegal immigrants off of Medicaid and keeping that for U.S. citizens. So how much of this is he opposed to? What percentage of the overall cuts is he opposed to? Are we talking about 2%, 20%? I'm confused on exactly what he's against and how big of a problem this may represent for folks in the Senate and the GOP coalition sort of writ large.
Yeah, Tom, I share your frustration. I voiced a bit of frustration to the senator during our sit down because it is difficult to pin Republicans down at this moment. We're not even really at the beginning of the end of the sausage making process here. One thing that Hawley told me that was particularly interesting was that he said there's a lot of speculation around the House version of the bill, but he expected that there was going to be a Senate version, and he's focused on what that Senate version looks like. And then later, when both chambers come together to try and reconciliate the differences, that's when he is, trying to, shoot his shot here.
All right. We had to cut that one short. Phil Wegman, our White House correspondent, he's on pool duty at the White House. You never know what's going to happen. So he had to run. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM right after this.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics, talking now to Greg Orman, independent from Kansas, and a true independent sports fans. A lot of people say they are, but Greg really is. Well, anyway, welcome to the show, Greg. Appreciate you.
I'm happy to be here.
So we have a column that we ran that Greg wrote for us about Elon Musk, and it acknowledges this mean girl spat that President Trump and Elon Musk got into last week, but it goes beyond that and tries to look at Elon Musk's business and specifically Tesla. And it's a bit, Greg, you put on your futurist hat because you make the case that Tesla is, by normal metrics, overvalued, not because of the direct action against Tesla, these thugs, keying cars and burning it down dealers, but because of the kind of money Tesla makes, given its stock, its valuation, and that it's people are betting on this company not because of the cars it's making, but because of something else it's going to make in the future. Tell our listeners and viewers about that.
Well, Tesla is actually a very interesting company because if you think about it, we all think about it as an auto manufacturer, and by every measure, it has been one of the most consequential auto manufacturing companies in the world ever. I mean, they single-handedly really helped us make the transformation from the internal combustion engine to electric vehicles. So in that regard, they really were a leader. And in fact, I remember buying my first Tesla in 2013, And speaking to the person at the dealership in Chicago, the distribution center in Chicago that was sending me my car, and they said, "You're the 5th car we've sent to Kansas." So it was
5.
Number 5. I was number 5. So I've been a longtime fan of the automobile and what it's done to transform the automobile industry in America. But the reality is, if you look at Tesla's valuation, its valuation is heavily driven by the perception that they are going to revolutionize a couple of other industries the same way they revolutionized the automobile industry, one of them being humanoid robots, and the other being driverless vehicles. And if you think about that, the one thing those two things have in common is the elimination of work, the elimination of jobs. And Elon Musk, in describing his vision for their Optimus humanoid robot, suggests that he believes eventually there will be one such robot for every human being on the planet. I guess that means we're all going to have a butler. But nonetheless, it's a really remarkable vision when you think about it, not just in terms of what's driving the company's value, but what it means for the future of work and what it means for the future of policy in America.
I want to talk about that because Elon Musk took over Twitter, and Twitter had become, unfortunately, it had not lived up to its early promise of, being a beacon of the First Amendment. It had sort of been co-opted by the government, not just by the Biden administration. This started when Donald Trump was president the first time, but these I don't try not to use phrase like deep state actors, but there were some bureaucrats in the intelligence community and the law enforcement that had begun to lean on Twitter. And this thing had avalanched, and they had sort of stifled conservative speech. So he took this thing over. That's a famous part of the story. What people forget, Greg, he laid off 2/3 of the staff. And there were two things about that when I was reading your column, your op-ed, I thought about. The first is that he may have got the wrong impression. That company was bloated, apparently. So then he comes into government and he starts, we talked about this earlier, you and I, he starts cutting people who doesn't know what they do, agencies who doesn't know what they do. I think he got the wrong impression from Twitter. But when you talk about these robots and you talk about Musk doesn't seem to understand or doesn't care. He's not concerned with human beings need to work. They need to have jobs. So if your column is right and you're a very astute financial observer and political observer, what are all these Americans who put out of work going to do? Companies' productivity may increase, but doesn't that portend some serious social disruption?
Well, it certainly does. And in fact, we've started to see the beginnings of it when we saw all the job losses in manufacturing driven by globalization and automation. We found a lot of folks who decided to permanently leave the workforce. And ultimately, we've seen things like our Social Security disability dollars skyrocket. If you look at the number of soft tissue claims, they've gone up dramatically since the Reagan administration at a time when manual labor has actually gone down. They've gone up, I think, by a factor of 3.
A whole country developing backaches who no longer work with their backs.
And again, I don't blame people for engaging in self-help. Everybody's got to figure out how to feed their family. And if from a policy standpoint, we're going to disregard and ignore the people who are displaced from these real meaningful technological changes, then I don't think we can blame them for trying to figure out how to feed their families.
Right, but there's not going to be enough, Social Security claims or disability claims. I mean, if you're talking about laying off, this tens of millions of people would lose their ability to livelihood. The Wall Street Journal had a piece last week. Already entry-level jobs from college this year. People are starting to companies fill those jobs with AI. And so what are the policymakers need to do? It's hard to stop technological advancement. So what are some of the answers here? What are some of the issues that Congress, the governors, state, local policymakers, thinkers such as yourself, where do we go with? What do we do with this information?
Well, the most important question is, how do we help people have a sense of fulfillment in life without work? That is by far and away, as far as I'm concerned, the most important question. And the corollary to that also is, how do they feed their families? And so I think we really need to reimagine both tax policy and social policy along the lines of those questions. And what that means is, we get half of our revenues as a federal government from the personal income tax. That number is going to fall if people start losing their jobs to AI and into these humanoid robots. And so we really have to rethink, do we have to go to a value-added tax, something more consistent with what we've seen in Europe, where we say what we're going to tax is not your labor, but the byproduct of the labor. And therefore, if a humanoid robot makes something that ultimately gets sold, it gets taxed the same way as if an individual did. We're going to have to look at things like, and I don't want to sort of hearken all the way back to the public works projects that we saw during FDR's administration, but we are going to have to figure out a way to involve people more in public life in a way that allows them to both make a living and at the same time have a sense of fulfillment. And really the bigger question here, again, this gets back to the dysfunction in our politics. I've long held, and the reason I'm an independent is largely because I believe the two-party system is irreparably broken. They're more interested in seeing the other party fail than they are in seeing our country succeed. And as a result of that, we're still solving the problems of the 20th century right now. And given what's happening and what the future looks like, we've got serious issues we need to deal with in the 21st century. And I think you just look at this, self-titled big, beautiful bill that's going through Congress right now, and you look at the things that they're addressing in that bill, and they have very little to do with what's coming around the corner and the implications of that for the American people. As I said before, we failed the American people around globalization and automation. We've got a $4 trillion import economy. We've never spent more than $1 billion on trade adjustment assistance. So think about that. I mean, huge implications for people. If we fail the American people again around the policies as it relates to what's about to happen in what we would call the fourth industrial revolution, I think we're going to see mass disruption. I think we're going to see alienation grow beyond the levels it's already at today. And I think the American society is going to be severely challenged and taxed by the failure of politicians to address those issues.
Greg, this was a long time ago. It might have even been in the 20th century. But when automation was predicted, when people thought there'll be robots doing manufacturing jobs, one of the ideas that came out of I can't remember the union, it might have been the UAW, but a think tank in the union shop said, well, displaced workers should own, have an equity in the robot. They should actually, if you lose your job to a robot, you should actually share the profit with the company. Nothing ever came of that, but, profit sharing, had its day, and it's probably going to come back. But you start to think about some of these ideas. Everything ought to be on the table. Maybe a person should be assigned a robot, not as a butler, but in the manufacturing sector and profit from that robot. Maybe we need to rethink this whole idea of workers. And maybe all the workers ought to, be partial owners, sharing the profit, because otherwise, this idea of how you get people to make a living, not a trivial matter. It's very important.
It is. And in fact, I do all my best thinking when I run, and I run quite frequently. And I had that very thought a couple of days ago as I was running, is if someone was going to lose their job to a humanoid robot, maybe one of the ways we address that is by saying they have a stake in the financial output of that robot. The person who really spent a lot of time talking about this and was, candidly, maybe a little ahead of his time was Andrew Yang. When he was running for president, he talked about universal basic income. And I don't know that I'm a fan of providing subsidies without production, because that leads to inflation. But the reality is, he was on the right path in terms of saying we've got to reimagine and think about how we're going to deal with the issue of work fulfillment income in the future. And that, sort of leads me to believe we're probably not going to get our best ideas coming out of Republicans and Democrats who are so committed to the status quo and protecting the status quo. We're probably going to get our best ideas from independents, from folks like Andrew Yang, the Forward Party, and some of the new parties that are emerging who recognize the failures of our two-party system.